very happy to introduce this series. Many of you will know about the Digital Preservation Awards, but for those of you who are less familiar, they are a fantastic celebration of digital preservation that happens every 2 years, and they celebrate the achievements of people and organisations who have made significant and innovative contributions to securing our digital legacy for the long term, and that sort of falls across 5 broad categories. So we ask for nominations relating to research and innovation, to teaching and communications, most distinguished student work, most outstanding digital preservation initiative in commerce, industry and the third sector, and finally safeguarding the digital legacy. So we're going to hear from each of our category winners. And last year, in 2018, when this all happened, we held the Digital Preservation Awards outside the UK for the first time in Amsterdam as part of our World Digital Preservation Day celebrations. And it was fantastic. I mean, the atmosphere was incredible, and our winners were all absolutely deserving. So in this series, as I say, we're going to learn a bit more about each of their work and learn and understand why they were the winners. So I'm going to hand over to William now to share a bit about the judging process and the reasons the team was selected, the ePADD team was selected, because they were the winners for the research and innovation category. So William, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and it's a pleasure to be here and to be back on with Josh and Glyn and Peter to reflect a wee bit on the ePADD project and to celebrate again briefly the award. It was my pleasure to introduce the awards in Amsterdam just at the end of November there, and to kind of talk my way through the awards from top to bottom. So let me talk about the Research and Innovation Award first, the one which has been awarded to the ePADD team. So we've run the Research and Innovation Award now. I think it's the 4th time it's been awarded. Previous winners include the Open Preservation or Open Planets Foundation, as it was then, Open Preservation as it became. Also, some of you will remember Klaus Reckert and colleagues with Emulation as a service. It's a very high standard of category, a very high standard of nominees which have been received historically and awards given out. The award celebrates significant technical or intellectual accomplishments which have a practical impact on lowering the barrier to effective digital preservation. There's a kind of important theme there about practical and applicable work which provides not just technology but also kind of a significant intellectual accomplishment. It's not just enough to develop a tool, but there's a need to develop a tool that can be deployed quickly and effectively and for the widest possible benefits. The awards always recognise the need to be, that we don't want to be restrictive, that we want to encourage participation and encourage the widest possible set of nominations. So it was a great pleasure to receive the nomination, not simply from our colleagues in Stanford, but the many different applications that we received as part of the nomination and judging process. We don't ever talk about the numbers. We don't ever name people who are part of the process, except for those who are shortlisted. But what we can say is that, once again in 2018 we had by far the largest number of nominations, and it's also fair to say that research and innovation was I won't say necessarily the biggest, but one of the bigger categories in terms of the nominations received. And nominations coming in from around the world and from many different types of organisation and many different types and contexts of digital preservation requirements. So it was a fairly fierce competition. That's the point I'm coming to. And I need to reflect for a moment on the achievement of Glyn and colleagues, but also to praise for a moment also those who were on the shortlist, because it's not simply a question of the success of ePADD, but we should pause for a moment also and remember the other finalists that joined them, the Flashback Lab and Flashback project at the British Library and the Vera PDF Consortium who were finalists. I have some embarrassment there because the DPC was a minor partner in the Vera PDF project, so the result of that was I ended up sitting out of the room for quite a lot of the decision-making phases. And then finally nominated for an award and then went on to get a special distinction, Sarah Higgins at the University of Aberystwyth with her work on digital curation and the digital curation life. So a tremendous pool of applicants, a tremendous shortlist, but it was ePADD that won, and it's my job, I guess, to explain a little bit on that. I won't spend long, but we got a whole load of correspondence from DPC members as to who they thought was the best and what projects they liked the most and what they felt was the most impactful. So let me just read out one statement, which I think sums it up for me in relation to ePADD, going back over the judges' comments and the comments received from the DPC members. So one DPC member wrote to us that they wanted ePADD to win. They chose ePADD, I'm reading now, because this initiative showcases the progress, fine-tuning of practice and innovation in digital preservation over the last decade. We like the explicit reference to humans as well as technology and artificial intelligence, and we expect to be using this tool at least within the next 5 years, if not before. And that seems to me to be a home run in terms of all those criteria that I read at the start. So I turn now to, again, to Josh and Glyn and Peter to introduce ePADD to us a little more. I think we've got about half an hour, 40 minutes of a presentation, is that right? But there's plenty of time for conversation and discussion to follow. So over to yourselves.
Thank you. I would say good morning, but I know it's afternoon for most of you. So welcome. I'm going to try to be very brief in the opening comments, just to introduce a little bit about ePADD, and then Josh is going to do the demo, and hopefully we'll leave a lot of time for questions. And then the chat box will be monitored throughout, so you can enter questions at any point. Sorry. So we all know that email is important for research, very essential. It documents a lot of aspects of people's lives, not just their correspondence. But because of that, donors and institutions alike have a lot of concerns about exposing email content to researchers, even in their own managed reading room settings. And a lot of this anxiety springs from the very personal nature of email accounts. But also it's been affected a great deal by all the news cycles devoted to email discoveries, most of them negative, of course. I think that this creates, an anxiety both in the donor's side, but also on the repository side. Email was designed by archivists and computer scientists working collaboratively to address the challenges of screening email collections and making them available. That was one of our main goals, is to make them discoverable and available for research. It is a free and open source software, one that helps account creators, donors, curators, and archivists screen email archives for potentially sensitive or restricted data, and then, as I said, to make them discoverable and accessible. In support of this work, ePADD applies techniques from computer science, including natural language processing and named entity recognition. Oh, they're not synced. Okay. Sorry, I'm working on two computers. We have just wrapped up our second grant, which was a 3-year grant funded by IMLS, to develop the software beyond our initial pilot project and to also grow the community of users. The functionality we've developed has been scoped via user stories from our partners and the broader community. And it has been supported also by working groups from our community and other user contributions. The primary team at Stanford in this development has been remained constant for 5 years for 2 grants. So I've been directing the project. Peter is our project manager throughout, and Josh is our community manager. And Sudhindra Hengal, our technical advisor. And on the second grant, Chinmay joined us as our software engineer. And I also want to point out our partners on this grant, and also thank all of the user community who helped out with the project and our advisory group. So ePADD is based on Java and supported by various platforms. It's structured into 4 modules, and Josh will show you those: appraisal, processing, discovery, and delivery. And I am actually going to turn this over to Josh now for the demo.
Thanks, Glenn. Thank you, Sarah and William and DPC for this opportunity. And I just want to personally note that I was able to attend that meeting in Amsterdam to learn that we received this award. And it was really a thrilling experience. So thank you again to everyone who voted for us, and even those of you who maybe didn't vote for us. Thank you as well. So we're gonna go into, is this it? So what you're seeing now is the ePADD appraisal module. As Glenn mentioned, ePADD has 4 different modules. Each of those is geared towards potentially a different audience. So the appraisal module is intended for the email creator or donor to work with an institution to potentially appraise their own email if they're interested in doing that. So when you first load up ePADD, you see a screen that looks like this. And you have some helpful tooltips on the side on many of these screens to help direct you through the program. And you have the opportunity to add information about the archive owner if you have that information, if there's a single owner. ePADD recently expanded the ability to browse and search across the accounts of multiple owners. So this field is now an optional field but can help with analysis. And then you can point to the mail either through an IMAP connection for a public or private account or to an MBOX file. MBOX, if you don't know, is sort of a ubiquitous format for email. And there's third-party tools that exist to convert mail from other formats like PST to MBOX so that you could get it into ePADD. So once you import the mail, ePADD does a few things. First off, it deduplicates the mail. Second, it could be that if you're importing mail from a variety of locations, some of it might be duplicative. So it's nice that you're only looking at a single version of the message. It also resolves some of the different names of the correspondence, and we'll look at that in 1 second. And then finally, it extracts entities from the archive, and we'll review what that means and why that's helpful in a minute. But first, I just want to sort of orient you to the software so you can see what we're doing. So we just imported mail. Hopefully you can see my cursor at the top here. ePADD has a lot of different browse functions, search functions, and then of course you can export to the next modules and to make the mail available to folks. So we're going to start by going through some of these browse options. And again, we're in this first appraisal module. The way ePADD works, a lot of this functionality carries over to future modules, so we won't need to review this same stuff when we're looking at the next modules. So first, I want to show you what the correspondence screen looks like. So here we're looking at the email of Jeb Bush. For those of you who may not be familiar, Jeb is the brother of former President George W. Bush and the son of George Bush, who was also president. And he ran an unsuccessful campaign. He was a Florida governor and ran an unsuccessful campaign for president in the U.S. But in order to show that he was a very open candidate and that he had great relationships with his constituents, he made his mail publicly available, including a lot of personal information of those folks. So very soon after, he took it down, but not before our esteemed project manager, Peter, grabbed a copy off the internet. And we now use this for test archives. And we feel good about that because we know that the mail is also accessible through the state of Florida. So, but it makes a nice test archive, and we're just looking at a small subset of that archive. So you can see I mentioned that the software resolves names and email addresses of correspondence. If you think back to your own email, you might have several different accounts that you've used over time: Gmail, Hotmail, your work email accounts. ePADD resolves and concatenates all of those so that you only see one Kathleen Shanahan, which is nice for analysis and for visualizations. And these are the sorts of visualizations I was referring to. So we're looking at just a small subset of the email now, but you can see the top correspondence over time that Jeb was speaking with. If you were to click on any of these correspondence, which I'll do, now you'll see, trying to blow up my screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, you'll see this sort of message browse and message review screen. And this is where a lot of the magic happens. So it's loaded the 479 messages that involve Kathleen Shanahan. I can use my arrow keys to very quickly scroll through them. Kathleen Shanahan is highlighted. You can see all the headers here and the message body here. There's various actions that you could take on this message or set of messages, and you can define these actions in a screen I'll show you later. But just briefly, you could decide as the donor working with the archivist or the institution that you don't want to transfer this message, or you don't want to transfer this set of messages. ePADD is also identifying errors in messages. So one of the first things you might actually want to do when you first load up the archive is look at this report that shows you the mail that you've imported and the types of different error messages, the types of different errors that ePADD has found. It could be that you'll want to review the file, the mail, before it comes into ePADD, do a little troubleshooting, potentially with some technical staff, in order to ascertain whether any of these error messages can be resolved before you start working on the mail. Once you've done that, though, ePADD provides all these different tools to review the mail and to decide which mail you'd like to make available and move forward to the next module. So I clicked on Browse Entities. ePADD actually extracts a number of fine-grained entities from the mail. So these are the different types of entities that ePADD currently recognizes. These are bootstrapped from different types on DPpedia. And if we were to click through any of these, I'll show you an example. Since he worked in government, I'll click on government agency. We can see all of these different entities associated with government. So these are entities that show up within the body of the message. So if I were to click on this, you would now see there are 13 messages that include the Florida Department of Education. And everything here is linked, so I can click through. We're back on this screen, so I'll just show you a few other things. You have your search facets over here, so you have your correspondence, any labels which have been applied. ePADD allows you to add annotations to an individual message or a set of messages. And then those annotations would show up over here. You can also, a new feature that we add is the ability to open a thread. So if there was some back and forth, you could do that here. And then if there were any attachments, you could go directly to those attachments. Finally, we have a message ID that you can copy directly from the message. And you can also download an individual message or set of messages as an mbox file. So heading back to the browse screen, we looked at one of those restriction labels and a number of these system labels. There's some other general labels that can be really helpful. For instance, if you've already reviewed a message, you might want to use this label because there's so many different ways of getting to a set of messages. Really, one of ePADD's strengths is that it gives you all of these different tools to get at the different ways in which you might want to review messages for potentially sensitive information or to learn more about the email archive. So using a label like reviewed is helpful because once you've labeled a certain message as reviewed, you can use advanced search functionality and say that you want to ignore those messages, and you can use some of the other functionality to really limit the set of messages that you're reviewing. All of these, except for the system labels, can be edited, and you can also create new labels here. The labels that you can create can either be general labels or restriction labels. And these restriction labels can be actionable, taking advantage of the fact that in most cases we know a date associated with a message. You can take an action on a message until a certain date, so 2035, or you might say restrict the message for 25 years, and ePADD will calculate what that date would be. ePADD also includes a really nice little image attachment browser. So ePADD relies on Apache Tika to recognize attachments. It's just an Apache library. Were you to click on,
Here's what I found.
were you to click on any of these attachments, it will give you the opportunity to go to the associated messages. There we go. So you can see the attachment highlighted here, and were we to click on this, if this was a longer message, that would take us directly to the attachments. ePADD also has the ability to show you the other attachments. It doesn't include a viewer, a native viewer within ePADD. We expect that for modern contemporary attachments, you would rely on your own software on the computer where you're reviewing the mail or providing access to the mail. But of course, third-party software like QuickView Plus does exist to view legacy formats. We have the ability to view multiple folders. So if you've actually brought in email from a number of sources, you could track that and follow those links here. We also have something called the lexicon. So ePADD originally shipped with a handful of lexicons, and as Glenn mentioned, we've had a number of working groups. One of them was a lexicon working group, which developed a number of these other lexicons here. I'm going to click through and show you an example of what these lexicons are. So I clicked on the sensitive lexicon, and here you can see that we have a number of different categories of keywords. And were I to edit this lexicon, you could see what those are here in these different categories. All of the lexicons are completely customizable, and you can create new lexicons. These are basically just really convenient ways of doing very complex searches that you wouldn't want to type in each search term one at a time, and that could potentially apply across different email archives and different collections. So that's why a lexicon working group was helpful, because it showed that across any particular kind of collection, you could search for similar types of keywords, and that could be helpful for you. So the idea is that you could do these searches all at once. So let's say I click on the sensitive lexicon. I can now search for all of those terms associated with employment all at once and review this set. So if we decide that those terms would be especially helpful to highlight some sensitive information or confidential information, we could use the lexicon to do that. One other lexicon that I want to show you is this regular expression lexicon. And again, this is completely customizable. So you can add your own regular expressions here and do searches, and then decide that you might want to not transfer those messages or restrict them for a certain period. So beyond browsing, there's some additional functionality here. This is where you could potentially set the owner. So if we wanted to set, so this is all of Jeb Bush's email. If we want to optionally set the owner as a different person to view the email from that perspective, we could do that here. ePADD has a variety of other types of searches. You have a simple keyword search, a way to search a bunch of entities all at once and actually compare the entities in this text box to the entities in the email archive. You can search a variety of terms here, just like for the lexicon. You could just paste a number of terms here and search them all at once. And ePADD also lets you paste a number of email addresses. This came up because we had a professor here at Stanford who had a list of several hundred correspondents, and he wanted to restrict all of those messages. And rather than do this one at a time, our developers built this functionality to search those all at once. So you could do that kind of searching here. And then I mentioned the advanced search screen. We think we really threw the kitchen sink at this. We think comparatively it could be very helpful. You could do things like specify that you don't want to see messages that come from a mailing list, and you'd like to see messages associated with a certain email source or associated with a sensitive disease lexicon category. You could do all sorts of really interesting, complicated searches here to get you to the set of messages that you'd like to review. So once you were done with all of that review here and the messages were labeled, you would go to the export screen. ePADD has a variety of export options. You can export to the next module, the processing module, which is intended for the institution. You can export attachments. You can export all the messages that you've restricted or that are unrestricted as an mbox file if you'd like to keep that for preservation or for other work. So let's assume that we've exported to the next module. I'm going to very briefly show you some of the additional things that show up in the next module. And then we're going to jump through the other modules quickly because we want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. So let me back up a second. So we've added an image. I haven't shown you that, but we've added an image for this collection. There's a place to do that. And there's also the ability to add some description. And all of this carries over to the next module. So not only will the archivist see this great information, but the public will see this information when you export this for discovery for people to find it online and to the reading room for delivery. So we've added some basic information about Jeb Bush here. You would load up the archive. Right, so you can see that you have pretty much all the same options here. You can see we're in the processing module over here. So this is meant for the institution to do a little bit more of that screening. So there might be certain things that are meaningful for an institution to search for, like say the terms of the gift agreement, or maybe your donor just didn't have time to do any review at all. So this would be the module where the institution could do more of that kind of review for sensitive information and potentially use lexicons or create lexicons to aid with public searching in the future. We also have this screen at the top, a new screen that wasn't in the last module called Authorities. And this enables archivists and institutions to associate authority records from OCLC FAST with different correspondence in the email archive. So the idea behind this is to make it a little bit easier for you to gather this information in the place where you have a lot of additional clues that maybe catalogers at your institution wouldn't have. So OCLC FAST, if you're not familiar, is a small subset of Library of Congress subject headings, but there are also links to BIOF, NAF records, and Wikipedia here. If there isn't an authority record, you can also, if ePADD doesn't know of an authority record that exists, you can also add a local ID or link to these other control vocabularies. So assume that we've done some of that same work here and we've done an additional round of review of screening of messages. Now we want to export for public consumption, right? So I just want to briefly show you the additional export options here that you have in processing. You can again export to the next module. You can export attachments, including just those that aren't recognized by the libraries upon which ePADD depends. So if you want to make sure that there might be some legacy formats that TCAD doesn't recognize and you want to review just that subset, you could select that here to export. You can also export headers for network analysis. Again, export messages in mbox. You can export all entities or just a certain fine-grained type of entities. You can export all of the correspondence here. Either the confirmed ones along the lines of what we just showed where you can associate those authorized headings or just the unconfirmed correspondence. And then you can export the original text of non-restricted messages as individual TXT files to support topic modeling. So I'm going to just jump online to show you at ePADD.stanford.edu. This is a publicly accessible site right now. And this is where we provide public discovery for the email collections we process with ePADD. So I'm going to click on the Harrison Studio collection. And you can see all of that information. I went through it quickly, but hopefully you saw a glimpse. All of that information that would have been added in processing carries over to this module. So this ePADD.stanford.edu, right, this is running live on the internet. You can access this from your computer. So you can see instead of the 9 boxes under Browse, we only have these 3 boxes. And that's because we don't export everything. For copyright and privacy reasons, we only export the extracted entities. Oops. the correspondence, and the date of the messages. So you can see in place of all the other information, we have these ... So we've sort of taken a reverse redaction approach to this. We figure that if you're a researcher online and you want to decide whether it's worth writing a grant to come to Stanford to view the email, the information that's most helpful to you is knowing who wrote to, in this case, the Harrisons, a family of artists, environmental artists, when they wrote to them and what they discussed. So that's why we keep these extracted entities in the archive as well. But we blot out everything else. And again, when you search, you can see fewer search features here because you're only searching across those extracted entities. So let's say that you're a researcher and you found content online that you'd like to view, and you could also copy the message ID from Discovery to make it easier to find these messages later when you come into the reading room. So let's say you found messages online and you come to Stanford to view the corpus. Again, we're now in the delivery module. The user would come to a dedicated workstation in our reading room or in a repository's reading room. They get the same information. They load up the archive. And you can see here they have pretty much all the browsing options that we had previously, right? So the user can browse across all of these categories. They can view all of the correspondence and all of the full text of messages, including attachments. Attachments were also not included in the Discovery module. They could add their own labels, right? They could create a label here that says, I'd like to use this in my book, or add this to a particular chapter, or, oh, so interesting, this mentions so-and-so, right? They could also do that kind of work through annotations. And then they can request that materials be exported and that they get a local copy of email. And of course, that's up to the institution to decide. Our machine in our reading room is locked down, so they could download all the messages they want, but they wouldn't actually be able to transfer those without the help of public services staff. They could also do all the kind of searching that we did previously, including all of the advanced searching that was enabled in appraisal and processing. So that pretty much summarizes the software as it currently exists. We have about 3 or 4 slides to sort of wrap up, and then we're happy to get into the Q&A. Right, so I'm going to turn things back over to Glenn to discuss what's next in our community, and then we'll jump into the Q&A.
Hi, everyone. I'm not going to talk a lot here because just in case there's a lot of questions, and we may have to go back to some screenshots of ePADD. But and I'm also, we have a lot of things we'd love to do next, primarily dealing with issues of scaling. So most of our collections that we had received had been under 1 million messages, but we received one recently in the process of transferring that's over 2 million messages. So we are also having to quickly figure out how to deal with that many messages. There's other issues as well, and I think that I will probably not go into them just to save time. We would love to work more with the community. We are talking to another institution about the possibility of delivering their entities, their metadata, through our Discovery site. So that is hopefully one direction we could go in. And I just wanted to show you, this is, oh, sorry, you have to, no, oh, no, you have an old slide deck. Okay, so this is our current version of software up on GitHub. So you can download it there. There's links to user manual from our project site, and links to all of the GitHub and everything here. And I will, so I'm just going to leave you with this slide deck. We would be very interested if anybody is interested in collaborating with us in the future. We are sort of exploring our options at this point, looking for one more largish push for development, and at the same time trying to figure out a better model for sustainability moving forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Q&A. I don't know if you want to leave this last slide up or if you want to take it down.
Let's leave that last slide up for a bit. It's got good contact on it, and that gives people time to grab them, if that's okay, Glenn. We've got quite a good chat going in the chat box. So, I mean, there's a few matters of fact to clarify. Maybe we could start on those. But then please do just raise your hand or type other questions in the chat box as we continue. So I've got Sonia Nielsen. Sonia, as I recall, you're the National Archives or the Royal Archives in Stockholm. I might be wrong on that, but Sonia asks, do you work with languages other than English? My reflection must be that Jeb Bush probably has Spanish in there, but God bless Sonia, she has every interesting question because she's also looking at different character sets and all the different possibilities, I suppose. So other languages other than English, discuss.
Yes, basically ePADD can recognize other languages, but if you do full text search, we also support different language because underlying ePADD, the search engine, we use the Lucene engine, which support multilingual search. But on the entity extraction side, the library is trained on English only. And also so there's two parts on that. The name basically trained on English, and also we train our fine-grained entity on DPpedia, on the English version of DPpedia. So I would say, in future, if there's any institution interest to work with us to integrate the other language entity extraction to ePADD engine, then that will be a very nice match for their collection.
And I'd just like to mention, I mean, there has been a lot of interest in this. We had a recent inquiry from an institution in Italy about this. And also there's a faculty member at a university in Spain who basically, he and Sukhindra are speaking. He's teaching a class in localization and converting software into Spanish in this case. So he's going to have his class work on this. So he and Sukhindra are talking right now. We are definitely interested in pursuing this. We just haven't had anybody sort of step up as a sort of partner in that aspect, in developing that.
I mean, that seems to me an open topic then, especially for the Europeans among us.
Yeah.
I mean, that multilingual computing has been such a strong theme of European Union funding, whether for e-research or kind of research infrastructures, or in terms of digital libraries and digital preservation itself. That I think I speak to you, of course, from a country that's not going to be accessing those funds for much longer, but maybe some of the others on the line would be interested in following that up. I wonder about DPpedia. So there was a mention there, Peter, you mentioned DPpedia, and Josh mentioned that briefly earlier too. Now, I'm going to just pause for a moment and just say, could you say just a bit about what DPpedia is? My guess is that DPpedia is probably not as well known as it could be, and it's in fact a really useful kind of reach out to another kind of application, really, isn't it, or another set of services. Do you want to say what it is and how you find it useful?
Yeah, sure. So DPpedia is basically what you find in the info box in a wiki page. So in wiki page, if you search some people's names, say Robert Quigley, on the right-hand side, there's a box on some structured data, say date of birth, place of birth, some, say, important awards. So DPpedia is a collection of all those structured data, because basically Wikipedia is not structured. Anyone can just write a paragraph or write something about something. So, but the info box is a structured data. So some organization collect all those structured data and then make it available for researcher to use. So ePADD make use of those data. So that's why we have structured data. We choose some of the structured entities for us to search our collections. So, but I would say, now we are using DBpedia. In future, when the next round of funding, if we have, then we may need to look into Wikidata, because Wikidata actually is another products from Wikimedia, which provide Wikipedia. So they are using Wikidata as the structured data centralized database for all the Wikipedia info box. So I would say there's some direction we may need to look at in future.
Thank you very much. I've got another question here, and firstly, my apologies to Sonia. I was confusing you with another Sonia. She's with the International Tracing Service in Germany. But I was going to ask a question from Angela in Libraries and Archives Canada, and I know that more confidently. Is there a way to bring multiple inbox files and not concatenate them? So if I'm working with two separate donors simultaneously, but want to process their email accounts separately, is that possible?
If we understand the question, I think I understand the question. So ePADD, until very recently, managed each donor separately. And in fact, in most cases, you would probably want to do that. This new feature that we added is to support listservs in cases where there might be multiple email creators associated with a project, and you really want to highlight the project or the institution more than those individual donors on their own. And so that's a new functionality that we added, where you don't need to have just one person that you see from, who sent mail and received mail. But typically each donor, if they're a separate donor, would have their own collection within ePADD and be processed separately and made available separately. You could still search across those collections. If you go to ePADD.stanford.edu, at the top of the screen, you can see that there's a way to search across each of the collections for different fine-grained entities.
Yeah, I think the last point is very important. So the course collection search is only search on extracted entities. It's not a full text search. So that is the main difference. Yeah.
I'll let Angela come back in if that has answered her question. Seems like a full answer, but maybe Angela, if you want to come in either in the chat or by voice to let us know if that answers your question. I can see there's also a question though about encryption. The simple question is material encrypted. I'm guessing there's all sorts of data protection, right to be forgotten and all the rest issues associated with managing large email collections. And maybe I could phrase the question slightly differently. What encryption issues or opportunities or tools might exist within the ePADD suite, or indeed be a challenge to ePADD?
Yeah, basically ePADD don't handle encryption. So whatever message that is encrypted before, you need to decrypt it. Otherwise, ePADD cannot recognize the content. But if you are transferring, ePADD from one, say the donor. So after they place their collection, and then when they want to transfer to us, then we ask them to encrypt the files, so that in case anything happens, if you lose a file, if you lose a drive, then since your file is encrypted, then people won't be able to see the content. So that's the encryption procedure that we ask people to do. But but as I say, if there's encrypted message inside, people need to decrypt it before ePADD can recognize it.
I see Angela's question, her follow-up comment online, and the answer is yes. In processing, you could have as many different collections as you're working with. So you could have multiple, you remember that box that said Jeb Bush with his photo? You could have multiple boxes like that and access each collection separately.
Yeah, actually we have the sources. If you look at the folder screen, so on the left-hand side, we have the sources. Sources, you can represent each mbox file as one source. That's one direction and one way you can use the source. So, but anyway, we can, nowadays there's one collection. Actually, we have 4,000 different mbox files.
I think you're going to get some follow-up correspondence from Canada from Angela's response. Well done. Listen, we're kind of 10 minutes to the hour now, so I'm going to invite any other follow-up questions. I think you've impressed us so much. Oh no, hang on. Here's another one from Angela. I should get her voice in first. Is there a way to move custom labels or lexicons across from instances of ePADD?
Yes, basically you can. Okay, so I would say say lexicon. You can download a lexicon and then upload the lexicon to another collection that you are processing. So for labels, we have some. There are known issues in our final release. So, but we may fix it, in some future release. Basically, you can download a label files and then also upload to another collection. But that upload process is not working properly right at this moment. But we will fix it in future release.
Thank you very much for that. I was going to go back to my kind of question about the email task force, if I may. You had obviously ePADD is part of this. To me, kind of part of this kind of family of work, progressing email preservation as a theme. Now, if I had a criticism, maybe a bit unfair because I was part of it, but if I had a criticism of the email task force report, would be it was very focused. Of course, it was focused on the scholarly community, especially kind of historical use of email as correspondence, which is what the Andrew Mellon Foundation is really interested in. It's interested in scholarly discourse and scholarly publication. And as I look at your list of users, I see a lot of universities in your kind of map of the world. Are there examples? Are there instances in corporate, especially corporate environments, business environments, where you think ePADD either has been used or could be deployed? Or is this really for big academic research uses?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, our hope was sort of that ePADD could be picked up more broadly, but it's true that mostly we end up talking to governmental or sort of academic institutions or faculty who are using it to teach. I did do one talk recently to record archivists, many of whom were at either corporate firms or law firms. And so they had invited me down to speak to them in the LA area. And it was a really interesting conversation that we had. They had a lot of questions. I haven't had any follow-up yet. I don't know, does anybody else have thoughts on?
Well, to my knowledge, corporation is more on records management. They are more concerned on deleting the records, when it's, say there's a law or legal requirement for them to keep email for a certain time. They want to make sure after that time, they will delete the record. Or they want to make sure they keep the record for the time that are required by law. So there's a less of the requirement that they want to preserve something permanently. But we also encounter some people want to use it is a Philharmonic, I believe it's New York Philharmonic. They want to preserve their email. And also we met some museum people. Say nowadays, say the preservation record. In the past, they have proper forms to fill up and then it's all paper. But now most of them are in email. So, and those records are also very important. They need to preserve those records permanently. So they also they are interested in using ePADD to make sure those records are preserved permanently.
And I think, that's the case at a lot of businesses where you have a set of records that are, of use for an active company or organization, a museum, gallery, where they do want to preserve them permanently or ongoing for a long period of time. And then there are some that they want to delete. So I think they would end up using it quite differently.
Yeah, I get it. I get the drive to delete as a really strong drive, but there's also regulation why they must sometimes keep that correspondence just as much. And my sense is just now they're keeping it by oftentimes having it on a backup tape somewhere, but without really much sense of how you would actually use it, keeping it for regulatory compliance rather than really making it accessible or useful to themselves.
Right.
But anyway, I'm pleased to see one or two other people were thinking along the same lines. So there's obviously an interest there. Maybe you can get into a big corporate environment somewhere, and maybe we can help. Maybe we can help try that out. Another question from Sonia, if I may. How far can I get using ePADD without having a repository? Because they're just at an early stage in digital preservation, just starting.
They don't have a digital repository. How far? So ePADD is sort of standalone. You don't have to put your MBOX, your process collection into a repository. Although we have been working closely to make it function better in transferring to repositories, but that is an area that we need to work much harder in, I think, in another grant.
Well, there are also different scenarios. Some people download their MBOX file and then put it in their preservation repository. There's one way to, because ePADD itself is not a preservation repository. We don't say it's just run on the personal computer, and then that personal computer, it depends on your backup schedule or whatever. Then that's the only way that we have duplicates. So I know people download their MBOX file and then put it in the preservation repository. We also work with New York Public Library. They are using Archematica as their preservation repository. So ePADD now is bundled in bag.it format, and then they put the whole bag, transfer to Archematica. The Archematica instance will do some migration of files from, according to the policies. So if they have Word file, say Word star files, created in the 1980s, they may migrate it into a PDF file. So after they migrate it, then actually ePADD will read the migrated files and then will present the migrated file to the user. So we already did some integration with Archematica.
And one thing I'll say, because the question was a little, is so our discovery environment that we showed you, where we're presenting the entities and the in-house, in anybody's reading room or wherever you're hosting the full text of unrestricted emails for that archive, you can do all that. I mean, that we have that path done for 3 collections so far. We have a few more in process, and that's irrespective of, totally separate from the preservation workflow of either your original capture or your processed archive. So I hope that answers the question.
It's 9 o'clock. I think everyone went home.
Oh.
Yeah, no, we're still here. I was just wondering, we should probably make that the last question, though, because it's time. It's time. Listen, thank you very, very much for your presentation, though. If there are questions that we didn't get around to, there's a lot of you on the call. if you did have a question you didn't get around to asking, please either just send it to us or the contact details there, how to reach colleagues. Please do keep the conversation going. Please keep in touch. ePADD team, fantastic work that you're doing, well deserved of the recognition. And I guess I should hand back to Sarah, who may want to bring things to a close properly and or remind me of anything I forgot to say.
I don't think you forgot anything. No, that was great. Thank you, everybody, and for those who participated in the chat and the questions and things along the way. That was really great. Just to say again that this recording of this episode will be posted on the DPC website too. So if there's anything you want to go over again and revisit, then you can do that, and that'll be made freely available as well. And just a quick note to say that we'll be back again this time next week, 4 p.m. GMT, for our next episode, when we're going to hear from the team who created the Archivist's Guide to Cryoflux. So that's Dorothy Waugh and from Emory University, and Shara Peltzman from UCLA, and there's loads of them. Basically, it's going to be great. So come back and chat to them as well. And we look forward to seeing you all then.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.